Hello everyone, this is Mark Harrell, Senior Pastor of Forest Hills Baptist Church, Wilson, North Carolina. Thank you again for joining me. As we approach Resurrection Sunday, after celebrating Palm Sunday, and our minds go toward the entry of Christ into Jerusalem and what we call Passion Week or Holy Week. And I think about how the Jews were looking at Christ, especially the leaders, the Pharisees, the scribes, the religious leaders of their day. And one of the scriptures that I focus on is called Caiaphus Prophecy. Now, Caiaphas was one of the Pharisees who was the chief priest that year when Christ entered Jerusalem. Our text comes from John 11:47 through 51. So the chief priest and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, "What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And the Romans will come and take away our place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was a high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish." He did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. Now, let's set this stage here. Lazarus has just been raised from the dead, and by this great event, this great miracle occurring, many people who were there mourning with the family when they believed Lazarus to be dead, were witnesses of this fantastic miracle. And John 11:4 said, "But when Jesus heard it, he said," heard what? He heard that Lazarus was ill, maybe unto death. He said, "This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." John 11:14 through 15. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus has died, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Afterwards, some had gone to the Pharisees, the people that were there, and told them what had happened about Lazarus being raised from the dead. So you can imagine how they felt when they heard this. Just one more miracle, one more thing to get people to follow him. There was too many witnesses at this time for them to deny that this miracle even occurred. God's purpose for Lazarus. Why you think about, why did Lazarus have to die? Jesus could have raised anyone from the dead. Who knows, he may have had other friends, other acquaintances. Even with Mary or Joseph's family, he could have raised them as well, as far as anyone who had passed away. But it was Lazarus. And you have to understand it was because of the timing, God's timing. One of the disciples we think about that would believe because of the miracle that occurred. And he says, "I do this so you may believe." And you would think by now, before his entry in Jerusalem, that wouldn't be the case. But the disciples were still trying to figure themselves out and who Christ really was. And at this setting, at this stage that's been set up, the death of Lazarus and his resurrection, or being raised from the dead, the Pharisees would act soon after hearing about this miracle. It almost sort of forced their hand to what to do next. The disciples didn't want Jesus to go back to Jerusalem because of known threats by the Jews to stone him. After Jesus said they were going, I love the response from Thomas, called the twin, and it's almost like the children don't want to go, but the parents says, "Well, you're going anyway because that's where we're headed." And they were following Christ. They were following Christ, so that's where they had to go. But if you notice in John 11:56, and there's a lot of different commentaries on this. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with them." Now, sometimes I hear it in sarcasm, or maybe pessimist. He's looking at it as, well, we know he's going to be stoned, so maybe we are too. Or he could have really said it with all sincerity, that, Lord, wherever you go, we'll go. And if you die, we will die with you. Now, Jesus knew that this last miracle would push the Pharisees over the edge, but he also knew that the timing of his arrest and crucifixion had to be flawless. Notice the desperate tone in the words here used in verse 48. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away our place and our nation. Now you have to understand, Rome had given Israel a lot of autonomy to continue their religious services, their worship, their theocratic laws. They were a theocratic nation. They followed the laws of Moses, and they allowed them to continue to do so. It was a legal religion under the Roman rule. But the reason people didn't like being under the Roman government was because of the corrupt taxation that they were under. And we think about this autonomy was even allowing the temple to have a temple guard. They could arrest people, but there was one exception. They could arrest them, but they could not execute anyone. That was allowed only under the Roman governor. Now in verse 49, but one of them, Caiaphus, who was the high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all." Now, I don't know what inside information Caiaphas had, or whether he truly had a prophecy from God. I don't believe that to be so. But the way he understood it, because he's saying to his fellow Pharisees in the council, you don't understand this in the right way. Let me explain to you what has to happen. It is better for one man should die for the people, and not that the whole nation should perish. They believed that if Christ kept gaining this popularity, that the Romans would come down hard on them as leaders and hard on the Jews, because they would recognize Christ as their king. And Caesar would not tolerate that. So they were afraid that this gain in popularity, that Christ was going to upset their status. John Piper states it this way: in the mind of Caiaphas, the substitution was this, and this is how he was looking at it. We killed Jesus so the Romans won't kill us. In other words, we're going to substitute Jesus for us, for ourselves. Now, in the mind of God, he'd already established his prophecy, or established what was going to happen to the Messiah. And in his mind, no, I'm going to kill, crucify the Son of God, Christ, my Son, so I don't have to kill you. God substitutes Jesus for his enemies, for us. Now that's hard to think about, isn't it? Thinking that the holy God, the righteous God, would kill anything. But everything had been set in motion since creation. We talked about this before, how God saw that we would need a Redeemer. And salvation is through the blood, the shedding of blood. You know, this slippery slope of murder and conspiracy is very difficult, because once the Pharisees and the chief priests start going down this slope, where does it stop? In John 12:19 through 11, when the large crowd of the Jews learned that Jesus was there, they came not only on account of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priest made plans to put Lazarus to death as well, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus. Now, these were religious leaders of their time. It's hard to imagine a bunch of pastors getting together and plotting out a murder because someone's attracting away their church members. These leaders were supposed to be shepherds for the flock of Israel. What do you think Christ was thinking probably of these leaders? Excuse me. What do you think he may have said even in the past about who they really were, who they were really serving? And the text tells us that in Matthew 23:33 through 34. He says, "You serpents, you brood of vipers, how are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town." Now, brood of vipers is a terribly expressive speech here. It's basically is symbolic, and we think about. He's not just calling them snakes. He's calling them brood of snakes, or even your parents. Your father is also the snake. Now, if you remember what the snake symbolizes, this serpentine brood from a serpentine stock, as their fathers were, so were they, children of the wicked one. Not only are they planning to kill Jesus, now they want to kill Lazarus. And Lazarus' only crime was being raised from the dead. Poor Lazarus is caught in the middle of all this, isn't he? So Jesus literally tells him that you are serving your father, Satan. That's what he called him. Satan may have believed that Caiaphas played right into his hands with killing Jesus, but he was really playing in the hands of God. And we know this by looking at Isaiah 53:3 through 4. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. As one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. So when we read this text, we understand that when Christ took on the sins of the world, past, present, and future, that at some point he had smitten Christ when he was on the cross. And I know it's hard to think about, but he also knew that Christ would be resurrected on the third day. So when you read about the prophecy of Caiaphas, don't believe for 1 minute that it wasn't self-serving. He wanted to maintain his status and position while God desired to institute the plan of redemption. God is indeed sovereign. The timing, the death of Lazarus, the preparation of the Passover, the coming of Pentecost. Could you imagine telling this story to the first century generation? So you're now a converted Jew to Christianity, and you're going to tell other Jews the story of Christ and convince them that he was the Messiah. Where would you begin? Where do we begin now? First of all, the virgin birth that was prophesied. The many miracles, the first one being turning water into wine. Number 3, healing the sick, the lame, the blind, and the lepers. 4, raising Lazarus from the dead. Talk about showing the power of God. Number 5, entering Jerusalem as the king, as prophesied. 6, hearing about the religious leaders plotting to kill not only Christ, but Lazarus. So that sort of lets the first century Jew know that, can you really trust these Pharisees and these priests? They plotted to kill 2 people because they were afraid their position would be reduced. So if you don't believe in God's power and sovereignty, you would think that this was a fairy tale. But we know it not to be a fairy tale. We know it to be true. The names, the times, the places have been proven in a lot of the archaeological findings. Certainly the Word of God that stand the test of time. But most of all, you can't just believe it up here. You have to believe it with your heart. So when you read Caiaphas' prophecy that Jesus had to die for the nation of Israel, he was right and he was wrong. It just wasn't for the nation of Israel. It was for all humanity. I hope you have a wonderful Resurrection Sunday. If you get the chance, please join us for our sunrise service at 7 o'clock at Forest Hills Baptist Church on the outside lawn in Wilson, North Carolina. Have a great week and God bless you.